As you already know, in our application, the virtual meeting application, we have 3 pages. One of them is actually getting access to the virtual meetings and check for the user's amount of tokens. Second one is displaying the balances with each individual token. So we actually need to interact with token balances and the native token balance. And in order to do that, we can get help from Moralis again. We can see the documentation under the Wallet API. We have the ERC20 balance, and inside here we have this EVM API.token.getWallet token balances function. And actually, if we scroll down, we can also see the return type. Since we are using TypeScript, we need to have a predefined type for the outputs. So we can use this for defining the type as well. And since we are going to be looking at native balance as well, let's take a look at how we can get it. And it's also pretty similar to the other one. The only difference is that from balance, we are calling get native balance instead of token. Let's implement this in our hook as well. We are going to have a separate hook for it. Okay, so we already have the import statements as well as what will be provided for you in the template. And let's fill in the gaps in this useBalances hook. Similar to the authentication, we want to modularize and isolate everything related to fetching the balances in here, so that every other page is going to just refer here. We are going to hold how many native tokens does the user own, or different type of tokens using an array. So let's actually start with token balances. It's going to be stored in the useState hook. So in the beginning, it's going to be an empty array, but we also need to define the type as well, because we are going to fill them with tokens. So for that, I have already created a token balance type, and this is going to be a token balance array. So initially it's empty, but from the types folder, you can see this token balance type. And this is a similar thing to what Moralis has provided for us in the output, with only addition of the optional parameters such as logo, thumbnail, or decimals. And after that, let's create one for native balance as well. But this is not going to be an array, obviously. This is only going to be a type of native balance. Since we are going to have only one native token, we are just going to need an object of native balance. So inside, let's create use callback function, so that it will remember what the previous value was, and it's going to avoid repetitive calling. And inside, let's do a try catch block. This is something I like to do, actually, this try catch blocks, for seeing the errors and not letting them actually stop our application. So let's call this error fetching token balances. Not a console error, but a console log. And this use callback also needs a dependency array, which we are not going to worry about for now. So let's actually think about the implementation of it. The first thing we need to take a look at if we have an address or not. So for the address, we are going to use the context that we have defined, the use app context. As you remember, it was holding is connected and address inside. So from here, let's call address. And if address is not defined, we cannot actually call any of the remaining functions. Since we don't have an address, we cannot have a balance for that address. After that, we actually need to start off this Moralis core. And this is something necessary for Moralis to be starting. So if it's not started, we are going to call moralis.start. And inside, we are going to provide our API key. This is the shorthand for API key equals API key, but since I named them the same, we can just use like this. And now we have the address, we have the Moralis core already ready. So let's start with getting the token balances. And we are going to do it by this Moralis EVM API. And inside here, for the native balance, we are going to use balance, but for this, we are going to use token. And from token, we are going to use get wallet token balance. And this also requires some inputs. And first of all, it requires address and it requires a chain. So since Moralis is compatible with all EVM compatible chains, we can just change the current chain and we can deploy this application to another chain, which is going to be completely fine. So I'm just going to call this current chain variable I have from the utils. And when I get the token balances, I want to set this to token balances. And for that, we are going to use to JSON, since we need to parse the response we get. And after this, we are actually done with the token balances. Now we have the token balances in our state. So when this hook is called for the first time, this token balances will be available for the caller to use. And let's continue with native balance. EVM API balance. And this is also going to ask for same parameters. And we are going to do the same with output, the result as well. And when we have this, we are actually done with the fetch token balance function. But what we haven't done is that making sure it's going to run when we call this hook. And before forgetting, let's add a comma here for the dependency array. Okay, now we are ready to do the use effect. This use effect will ensure that fetch token balances will be called when the hook is actually called. And since this is an async function, we couldn't define it inside the use effect. So we defined it outside of the use effect scope. And this will get a dependency of fetch token balances. And after that, we are just going to return the values we have inside the state, which are token balances and native balance. So with this, we are actually done. But what I want to do is I want to take this one step further, follow up on where we are with this process. So for that, I will create a state variable called loading. It's going to be a Boolean value. And let's initially set this to false. And I also want a message, just like loading, so that caller of this hook will know if it's loading and if it has an error, what is the error message. As I said, this is not mandatory, but this is something to improve the process of interacting with this hook. So this set message is actually going to be a string, not a Boolean value. And what we can do in here is when we are console logging this, we can set message to error fetching token balances without the error, because the error will look bad on the UI components. We just want to render the error in the console. And actually, let's make this loading to true initially, so that we don't need to define loading as true inside this try catch. But what we can do is once this is all finished, we can then set the loading to false. And in order to do that, we can use finally. And inside this finally, let's set the loading to false. And if we return these values as well, loading and message, now the caller of this function, so this can be any page in our application or any component in our application, will know that if it's loading or not, the process is going well or not. And if not, they will see this error fetching token balances and it will be rendered on the front end side as well. So with this addition, we are actually done with the useBalances hook. And in the next one, we are going to take a look at how we can get more detailed info about the tokens that we are displaying.